Hi, it's Carolyn. I'm here to help you learn how to bake and decorate amazing cakes. And in this video, I'm giving you 5 things that I do differently when I decorate my cakes in the summer versus the winter. Now, as cake decorators, I feel like the summertime is the busiest time of the year. And unfortunately, it comes along with the hot weather. And it's one of the things that annoys me the most about cake decorating because in the dead of winter, when it's really cold and cakes don't sweat and they hold together longer, nobody's ordering cakes because nobody has any parties. But anyway, so I have 5 things that I do differently in the summer versus the winter, and we will start with number 1. And that has to do with how I make my icing. Now, if you watch my videos, you know I only work with American Buttercream. My American Buttercream has a combination of butter and Sweet-Tex Golden Flex high ratio shortening. The high ratio shortening, it gives a really smooth mouthfeel. It's not greasy. The icing is super smooth. It tastes good. And in the summertime, I use 3/4 of a cup of the shortening in my recipe, while in the winter, I only use a 1/2 cup. And the reason being is that the Sweet-Tex high ratio shortening melts at a higher temperature than the butter. So having more shortening in my icing can help the cake withstand the heat a little longer. Now, I only work with American Buttercream, so that's all I have experience with. If you work with a meringue buttercream, which is mostly butter, or a whipped buttercream, I can't imagine that those would hold up really long in the heat, but I really don't know because I've never worked with them. However, with my American Buttercream, I just prefer to add a little bit more high ratio shortening to help it withstand the heat a little longer. On to number 2. And that is that I add more supports in the summertime. So when I stack my cakes, I put bubble tea straws in the bottom tier to help support the weight of the upper tiers, and I also dowel my cakes. However, in the summertime, I like to add some more straws in the lower tiers, and sometimes I will double or triple dowel my cake. This way, it is more structurally sound. The dowels are going to prevent the cake from shifting on the cake board, and those straws in there are going to prevent the cake from sinking in on itself. And the reason being, in the summertime, the cakes don't stay cold and you're traveling with them. And this way, the extra supports just help keep it together and prevent it from collapsing. On to number 3. And that is the temperature that I keep my house and my car. Now, I am usually freezing in my house when I'm working. The air conditioner is on blast. I need to keep my house really cold to prevent the cake from getting condensation on them. Now, I do refrigerate all of my cakes, so if you take a cake out of the refrigerator and bring it into a warm room, condensation is going to form on the outside and it's going to turn into a big mess. And I have a video where I talk about how to work with refrigerated cakes, and I will link that below. However, I have to keep my house really, really cold, so I'm usually wearing sweatshirts or long sleeves in the summer because the house needs to stay cold to prevent condensation from forming. And the same thing goes with the car. I usually cool my car off for a good 10 minutes before I load the cake in the car and go on the delivery. I'm freezing on my delivery, I wear a sweatshirt, and I try to keep the cake as cold as possible so it can gradually come to room temperature and avoid the condensation. So while I know how to drive with a cake, I've driven with tons of cakes and I know how to keep them nice and cold and gradually bring them to room temperature, you need to educate your customers on the same thing, letting them know that they need to keep the cake and the car really cold. And I do have an information sheet that I send out to my customers when they pick up their cakes on a hot day and how to handle it, and I will link that below. On to number 4. And that has to deal with how I decorate the cake, especially the bottom tier. And I say the bottom tier because that usually bears the brunt of the weight and is more prone to get hairline cracks in the buttercream as the cake softens and you're driving with it and you're going over bumps. I have found that the bottom tier is the first tier that could get a little damaged. So what I like to do in these instances is to add some decoration or cover the bottom tier with fondant to help prevent those little flaws from happening in the cake. So sometimes, like this cake that I just made last week, I opted to do a textured buttercream icing on the bottom tier. That way, as they were driving with the cake, if you went over bumps, these little hairline cracks wouldn't show through that icing. And I have a video showing you how I do this really simple textured buttercream technique, and I will link that below. And if I'm not going to do a textured buttercream, I will opt to cover the bottom tier with fondant, and I do let my customers know that I'm going to do that. Sometimes people don't love their cakes covered with fondant, but in cases like this, it may be necessary to help protect the cake from damage. And if it's not covered with fondant, I will end up decorating it heavily with fondant decorations to help cover any of those imperfections that may happen. So a cake like this where there's a bunch of ruffles on the bottom, or something like this where it's heavily decorated, it's still iced in buttercream, but there are a lot of decorations on there. That way, if you get little hairline cracks in the buttercream, you really won't be able to tell. Now, like I said, I tend to really focus on making sure the bottom tier is covered, but if it has to travel pretty long or if it's going to be outside, I may want to do that for all of the tiers in the cake. On to the fifth and final thing that I do differently in the summer. And I learned my lesson the hard way with this one, and that is doing simpler designs, especially for cakes that are going to be at an outdoor event. Now, outdoor events, you need to have all your information when you are taking this order. If a cake is going to be sitting outside for a long time, you cannot have any perishable fillings in there, no cream cheese in the icing, no fresh fruit that could go bad. You want to have a simpler design and flavor choices. And like I said, I learned this lesson the hard way. A couple years ago, I made this cake for a bride and groom that were having their event at an outdoor venue. And when they sent me the picture of them cutting the cake, and I can't for the life of me find the picture, all of those little flowers were drooping down the side of the cake. Now their venue, it was in a tent, it was outside on a really hot day, and there's only so much that you could do to try to keep the cake cold. They had fans going, but you know, that buttercream softened and the flowers started all sliding down the cake. And that's where I really realized, why did I say that? That's where I really realized that if it's going to be an outdoor event, we need to do something simple. So here are some cakes that I have made for other weddings that were outdoors. Some of them are semi-naked cakes with fresh flowers, which look really nice, and other ones are just really minimal with the design. So everything pretty much stays intact and nothing can melt off of the cake. So that's it. There's my list of 5 things that I do differently when I'm decorating cakes in the summer versus the winter. What did I miss on this list? What do you guys prefer to do in the summer to keep your cakes from collapsing or make sure that your cakes make it there in one piece? I would love to know. Leave it in the comments below. And just a reminder, I do have ebooks with all of the recipes that I use. I have my signature scratch pound cake recipes, all my best doctored cake mix recipes, my buttercream icing and filling recipes, along with my favorite numbers and my favorite fonts. So they will all be linked below. And I do have a Cake Academy membership program where I can help you elevate your cakes to the next level. All that information is in the description. Please like this video if you liked it. If you're enjoying my tutorials, I would be so grateful if you could buy me a coffee. My link is down below. And I would love it if you would keep in touch on socials and you could check out my website. And if you want to stick around, you can watch this video next and hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. And remember, it's cake. Have fun. I will see you on the next one. Bye.